Hey everybody, my name is Alex with Hake Hardware, and this is part 6, and actually it's going to be also part 6.5 to the Ultimate Autonomous Guide. The video is going to be both these parts together, but I split the Substack articles because they were getting a little bit long, and I think it just made more sense to split them, but we're going to cover everything in this video. So we will jump right into it. This part is going to cover getting Prometheus set up, getting Grafana set up, deploying our PDC agent, and basically everything up to the point where we start doing Autonomys specific things. So part 6.5 will pick up right where we left off, and we'll cover how to first ensure that your Autonomous containers are publishing metrics, because you do need to make sure that you have a specific flag set, and then updating Prometheus config file to see your containers, and then we'll deploy a basic dashboard in Grafana. It's not, as far as I know, there's not a really good Grafana dashboard, and that's why I built Spaceport, because I kind of prefer something a little bit custom. We're going to be covering Spaceport in part 7, so the next video. But I do think Grafana is going to be a good option once we have a little bit better dashboard built. So if anybody builds one or knows of one, please let me know, and we'll post some links to it. But let's get started by understanding how Grafana, Prometheus, and the PDC agent all work together with your autonomous containers. So typically you have a PC with a node and maybe a farmer as well, all on that same PC. And then you might have a second PC and you might have like a farming cluster on that. And you're going to be setting it up so they publish metrics. Now we have Prometheus, which is sort of a middleman between your autonomous containers, basically like Docker, and the Grafana, which is like a dashboard type application. So we have the added PDC agent, which is used to, I'm using Grafana Cloud. So there are two ways to use Grafana. We're going to go over those, but we're going to be mainly focusing on Grafana Cloud because that's what I use. But how this works is your nodes and your farmers, they're publishing metrics to Prometheus, and Prometheus is a Docker container. It's going to be run as a Docker container, and it's going to be listening for those metrics and publishing them. They're kind of like being transformed into something that will work with Grafana. They call it like a data source in Grafana, and you can choose Prometheus as a data source. So there needs to be this middleman that kind of like takes the metrics being published and puts them in a format that Grafana can understand. And the PDC agent is needed. It runs as a Docker container alongside Prometheus, and there's a connection between these two so that when you're setting up Grafana Cloud and you're adding Prometheus as a data source, Grafana Cloud is aware of it because the PDC agent is basically reporting and saying, hey, there's this Prometheus data source here. And then you, of course, will be just looking at the Grafana Cloud. You can run it, as I mentioned earlier, Grafana as a local like instance. I think it's like an application you install or something like that. But this is basically what we're going to be setting up. So let's get Prometheus going. The first thing we're going to want to do, and let me just move my windows around here a little bit. All right, so I'm going to be setting this up on Bob. And the first thing we're going to want to do is make a directory for Prometheus. Now I'm going to just do it in my home directory. And then we're going to want to create a YAML file for Prometheus. So we'll do nano home directory Prometheus and then prometheus.yaml. And from here, we can just paste in this for our config. So what we're doing here is we're setting up a global variable for our scrape interval, which means 15 seconds. So every 15 seconds, it's going to get metrics from its different jobs. We're setting up our first job, which is Prometheus itself, and we're putting where Prometheus is basically going to be running. So I'm going to deploy this to my autonomous network, which we set up in the earlier guides on 172.25, and I'm going to put it as 99. So if you remember, our node was .100, Nats was like .101, Farmer, or actually the controller was like .102. So we're kind of just going for our monitoring stuff, we're going below 100. And we're going to set up this static IP later when we deploy Prometheus to Docker. So from here, you can just do Control X, Y, and then Enter to save. And we have the config file for Prometheus set up. Now let's go back here and we'll go into Portainer. And let me get this a little bit larger. So what's happening here, if we go into networks, you can see we have the autonomous network. It's on the IP range that I mentioned earlier. And we're going to want to get a stack file created for this. So I'm just going to copy this, and as you can see, we're going to be running it on the autonomous network, and we're going to be using that static IP address we mentioned earlier. So let me just copy this. We're going to go into stacks, add stack, and we're going to do, I just like to do Prometheus, and you can just paste that in. Now, really all you need to update here is your path to the Prometheus YAML. Mine is using the home directory, so it has my login or my username here. You're going to want to swap that with your username if you're also using your home directory, or if you have it some other place. A lot of times people put it in the etc/Prometheus folder on your host computer as well. There might be a benefit to doing that. I haven't found it if there is. So if you look in the official docs, I think they may or may not have you. I don't think they actually have you put it there. Yeah, they just say like path to Prometheus. So actually, let me bring it up just so you can see. Here's the actual installation, and they just have you do docker run 9090 for the port volume to the prometheus.yaml file. And they just put path to Prometheus. So I don't see them saying like it needs to be in the etc/Prometheus folder. But anyways, we should be good at this point to just deploy this, and it will pick up our config file. And we have etc Prometheus here because it's referring to the mounted location inside the Docker container, so that is correct. Let's deploy this stack. And we can see that it is running. So server is ready to receive web requests. And we can confirm that by going to the IP address that it's hosted at. So if I go to home, well, Portainer is running on this network, but you can see the address for Portainer is this. So if I go to http://192.168.69.100.9090, we can see Prometheus comes up. And right now, if we go to targets, we only have one endpoint, and that is for Prometheus itself. By the end of this, we're going to have an endpoint for each of our autonomous containers. That includes, your node and your farmer, and if you're running clusters, you can add each of your clusters as well to the Prometheus endpoints. This just goes over what I basically just mentioned. If you for Grafana, so if we go to this link here, you can see that you can either download it if you want to do self-managed, or for your cloud, you can create an account. Again, I have it set up in the cloud, so I'm not downloading it. If you download it, you don't need the PDC agent part. So you'll see in the future where we mention, well, basically this section right here where we set up the PDC agent, you technically don't need to do that if you're running a local instance, but I like to have Grafana accessible, and I'm sure you could probably set it up where you have a local instance and it's accessible outside your network, but I just like the ability to use that with the cloud, and it's free. So it's up to you. I went with the cloud option. So let me just try and remember how I got to the Grafana cloud. Oh yeah, it's just Hey Hardware. There we go. So I'm actually going to delete this. This is my example here. All right, so what we can do is set up the PDC agent. So you're going to go to connections. So basically this assumes you set up your account and you have a free cloud. You'll go to connections and then you'll do private data source connect. Now, um, there should be a default one that gets created. You can select that. And then I have a token here, which I'm no longer using, so I can delete that. And then what I'm going to do is just click add token. And you can put a token name in if you want. I'm just going to leave it as is, create token. And you don't have to copy this. It's going to be available. Oops, I guess actually, well, if you don't copy it, you can just delete it. We'll do add, create token. And typically they show you, that's weird, I'm not seeing, okay, you got to go to configuration details. So I don't know why they have this here. We can just delete this. Go to configuration details. You're going to want to select Docker, create a new token, and there's probably like a generate button here where you can generate a fresh token, and you'll just want to, really what we're going to take is the token that's listed here, the cluster, and the ID. So again, I'm going to nuke all of this so that nobody has all my information, but let's go ahead and get PDC running inside Docker. So let's go back to the instructions here. We're going to copy this, and you can see where you're going to fill in your token, your cluster, and your ID. So I'm just going to copy this, and we will create a new stack. So add stack, and we're just going to call this Grafana PDC. And we'll just paste that in, go over to Grafana here, copy the token. Okay. And then we're going to copy the cluster. And then we are going to copy the ID. And we're going to leave this, we're going to set a static IP using 98. So if you saw Prometheus was 99, now we're doing 98. And we're going to use the Autonomous network, and we're just getting the Grafana PDC agent, the latest version. So we can just deploy that now. We can check out, looks like it exited. Invalid credentials. So I must have set something up incorrectly here. Let us, yeah, 0 agents. For some reason, it's not thrilled. Okay, we're going to just try creating a new token again here. We're going to copy that. And we're going to go back to Bob. Delete that. Paste that in there. Okay. For some reason, that token, I think I might have been the token that I had deleted and was using an old token, but that's what you should get. So now we can do test connection. We see one agent connected. Now we want to add, we're going to want to add, actually let's see what's next in the guide here. Okay, so we are going to want to, next thing we're going to want to do is add now Prometheus as a data source. So back in here, we're going to do data sources, add new data source. If you don't see Prometheus here, you can just search for Prometheus. And now you're going to put in, well, you can name it. I'm going to call it Prometheus connection. And we're going to put in the same, basically this IP address here. So I'm just going to copy, paste it in. So that's the Prometheus server URL. And then because I'm using Grafana Cloud and I have a PDC agent, you're going to select the correct PDC agent here, save and test, and fail to, oh, you know what? Let's see. We'll call this 2. All right, so I had already created a data source with that. And actually, I'm going to go to my data sources. You can see there's a lot of them here that I need to clean out. So these are all like old data sources. So it was just upset that I already had one called Prometheus connection. And I actually could have just updated that one if I wanted, but it works. And we successfully connected the Prometheus API. So at this point, we deployed Prometheus as a Docker container with just one job. Then we created a private data connection for Grafana Cloud. And then we finally connected the Grafana Cloud instance to Prometheus as a data source. And that was connected through the PDC agent. So it's important to note that all of what we just did, we only need to do once. We can connect all of our other servers to our Grafana instance without having to basically to our Prometheus. So all of our computers, we can point to our Prometheus, and it will then send everything over to Grafana. So we don't necessarily need to redo all of your work for every single computer. You only need to do this once. So that's it for part 6. And I do want to mention that like Grafana can do more than just what we're going to show in this video. Like there's certain um, like drivers, I guess, for Prometheus that will publish stats on your server. So if you want to see like CPU usage, RAM usage, network usage, disk usage, all that stuff is reportable. And there's cool dashboards that you can set up. So CADvisor is a cool one, and Node Exporter is a cool one. Those will give you a lot of like just generic non-autonomous specific metrics. So feel free to check those out. So that finishes 6. Now we're going to go to 6.5. And this is where we're going to actually set up our autonomous Docker containers and make sure that they are publishing the metrics. So there is a flag that you're going to have to add or make sure that it exists, and that's this -- Prometheus listen on. And you're going to be setting that to a specific port. And although it doesn't matter for a few reasons that I'm not going to get into, you should use a different port for each of your autonomous containers. So I start with 9080. Next one I do 9081, 9082, and so on and so forth. So if we look at Portainer Bob and we go to stacks and we check out our cluster, we go into editor, you can see you don't do it on NATs, so you can leave NATs alone, but you can see I have Prometheus listen on 9081, 9082, 9083, 9084. And then if I go back here and I look at my node, you can see that it's 9080. So you need that. And one thing to note is you need to put it, when you're looking at like your cluster, it must go after cluster, but before like the keyword for the specific cluster component. So before controller. After cluster, before cache. After cluster, before farmer. After cluster, but before plotter. If you try and put it after plotter, you're going to get an error saying it doesn't know what that means because like you're then sending that command to basically the plotter. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this, that you need to put it in the right location. Okay, so you're going to want to set all those up, and then we're going to want to update our Prometheus YAML file. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to open up the terminal, and we're just going to paste that in, and then we can open up our config file. Now we're going to want to add a new job. Let's see. So if we look back here, I was just noticing that I shouldn't have added the scrape configs part. We're just going to be taking this here, and I'll explain this in a second here. We're going to paste it in right here. So what we have is two jobs. We have the Prometheus job that we set up earlier, and then the Autonomys job. And these are the internal Docker network IPs and ports that we set up. So we have our node, which was on 9080, our controller 9081, cache 9082, farmer 9083, and plotter 9084. And they each have their own IP address, so theoretically we could have used the same port, because the reason why we can do this is because Prometheus is on the same network, internal Docker network, as all of our autonomous containers. Now, let's say we have another PC that is external to this network. We're going to be referencing the targets by the host IP address, which means if all of them are the same port, it's not going to work correctly. It doesn't know where to forward that port. So best practice is to always just, like, when I add my next computer that's external to this, I'm going to use 9085, 9086. The idea being that we just don't want any port conflicts. And I'm also, like, if I do an external PC, like I have another PC that's on port 192.168.69.102. Now, because it's on a different computer and not on the same Docker network, I actually have to use the host IP address for this. So we'll see if we get into that. I'm probably not going to show it in this video, but I'll try and cover it in a moment here. But for each of your containers, if you just have a node, you can add just the node part. If you have like just a farmer and a plotter, you can do just farmer and the plotter. However you want to do it, you're just going to want to set it up for the containers that you have. And then I'll just do Control X, Y, Enter to save that. And then we can go back to Portainer, and we're going to go to our stacks, Prometheus, and then we're going to restart Prometheus. Now we just want to make sure the config file was read correctly. It looks like it was. So we can go to Prometheus and we're going to want to refresh. And you can see everything says unknown, and that's because it takes a minute for Prometheus to start up. So we're just going to give it a second. We can refresh. Oh, all right, it was pretty quick, but sometimes it takes longer. But everything is up, which means that it has received metrics from these endpoints. So in these, as you can see, 82, 81, 80, 84, 83, and then this was 90, 90 for Prometheus. These are the 5 that we set up. And you can see I labeled it farmer, plotter, node, controller, cache, so we know which instance it is, basically what type of container it is. So at this point, we have everything being published, and we need to just like push it all to a dashboard. Now again, the dashboard isn't super great. I mean, huge shout out to Zolkes or Zolk something. Hold on, wrong one. Zolkis, who set this dashboard up. I think this is actually from a little while ago, but basically we're gonna use this dashboard ID to import a dashboard. So now we're gonna go back to Grafana. We're gonna go to dashboards. We're gonna do new, and then we're gonna do import. And then we're going to just put the dashboard ID, which is 20433. Click load. I'm going to just update it to Autonomys. You can see it was made so long ago. Actually, you can see, well, it said it was updated in August 31st, but a lot of this doesn't work for me, and it might be my own fault. I'm not too sure. Maybe it doesn't work with clusters. But I'll leave that there, and then we need to select a data source. So remember, it was Prometheus Connection 2 for me, whatever you named it, that's what you would add for that, and then click Import. And we can see that we have, I shut off my, basically, I shut off Prometheus for like an hour or so to set up this video, but You can see like blocks imported. You can see current peers. You can set like the last, we do like last 3 hours instead, just to be a little bit more granular. You can set up your refresh interval. We can see by default, all of the farms are selected. So I have 4 farms here, 4 disks, and we can see that they're all completely plotted. So 3,500 plots, none that have not been plotted. So we're at basically fully plotted. Then we have some like auditing time, proving time. I guess like if I get a block, that it will give a proving time. I'm not totally sure when that comes up, but capacity doesn't look like it's working for me. Again, this might just be because I'm using a cluster and not just a regular farmer. I'm not too sure, but you can get some information from this. So do I think it's beneficial? Yes. Do I wish there was like more information? Yes. And maybe some more information for the farmer would populate if it was actually plotting, because there's not going to be a sector download time unless it's pre-plotting, I guess, maybe. Um, so some of this information I just not helpful, but it is nice to kind of get like a glance view of this. So pretty cool, pretty useful. And so let's say, okay, so I have another computer. If we look at my instance here, I have Terminator, which is at, I gave it a DNS address of terminator.hackhardware, so hhw.home. If I wanted to add this to my existing, to Bob's Prometheus, so if we go in here, we have Prometheus sitting on Bob. What we would need to do is go back in here and under jobs, I would want to like label something like this more obvious. I would say like Bob node or something because I know that those are on Bob. And then way back here at the bottom, oops, we could do targets. And then we need to set up the IP address correctly. So I could do terminator.hardware.home, and then I would do 9085. And maybe these are all like 2 spaces is the indent. And then that might be like Terminator plotter or something like that. So I would just have to use the network for that. And that assumes, that on Terminator for my plotter, I've done that dash dash Prometheus listen on and set the port to 9085. And then for my next one, and I think I can just probably see if I can copy this. For my next one, I would just do the new port. And hopefully this makes sense why you would need to set up like unique ports. So there's no overlap in these ports. Because if you think about it, if my plotter, my farmer are both using 9085, how is this going to know to go to plotter or farmer? So they have to be different ports. But that's how you would set it up if you want now like external PCs also using the same Prometheus instance. And it's up to you. You could theoretically set up another instance of Prometheus on Terminator and then add another data source for Prometheus and have two Prometheus data sources. One is Prometheus data source, or like, one is Terminator Prometheus, one is Bob Prometheus. And actually, I can show you I used to do it that way, and I decided to not do it that way because I realized that I could just do everything through a single Prometheus thing. But if we look at data sources, like I used to have Alpha Prometheus, Bravo Prometheus, Charlie Prometheus, Delta Prometheus, like, and they were all on separate like IP addresses. So you can have multiple Prometheus data sources, one for each computer if that's how you want to do it. And it might make more sense to do it that way because you can set up dashboards for each of them. It gets a little confused. This is why I don't use Grafana that much anymore, because I don't know how to build the dashboards, and it takes a little bit of effort to build the dashboards. But I don't build the dashboards very well, and there's not really any good dashboards available. And they don't always have all of the metrics that I want. So next video, stay tuned. We're going to talk about Spaceport. I personally think it's a million times easier to install. And although there isn't a lot of data for it yet, I promise you, I'm very invested in releasing new features. So there's going to be a lot more features coming. I'm just going to Control X out of my terminal here. No. Okay. All right. So that's it for part 6 and 6.5. Hopefully it was useful. I will see you in the next video where we go over Spaceport.